on vous envoie avec le gun, le kilam.
I come today to make two things clear. The first thing is, there is no one in the diaspora sending children in Cameroon to go and die on the streets. Nobody is sending children out to the streets to go and die. Those children are fighting for their own freedom. They are the ones who are unemployed. They are the ones who do not have food to eat. They are the ones who are driving on bad roads. They are the ones who are suffering the most from Paul Biya's regime. They are the ones who do not have schools. They are the ones who do not have clean water to drink. They are the ones who do not have electricity. They are the ones who do not have internet. It's not the people in the diaspora. So they feel the pinch, and that is what is driving them to go out and fight. It's not anybody in the diaspora pushing them. What they are going through under Biya's regime is what is pushing them to the streets. So I want anybody who is thinking that it's people in the diaspora pushing people out there to go and fight should think twice. Should think twice. Why are people in the diaspora? Why are we here in the first place? So how do we think, or how can we sit and accuse or point fingers at other people that they're pushing children to go and die in the streets, when we know exactly why those children are fighting? We know why they are out in the streets. They are tired. They are hungry. They are sick. They are unemployed. They don't have schools. They're driving on very bad roads. That's why they are on the streets. If anybody does not understand that, then you need to see a doctor. The second thing I want to make clear is the hypocrisy in all of this. We cannot pretend that we feel for those children, or that we feel for the families who lost loved ones in the Anglophone fight, and yet we sit with the same people who go out campaigning for Paul Biya. We sit on the same table with them and dine with them in the name of schoolmates, classmates. We cannot be dining with those people. We cannot even be having a conversation with them, knowing that they are the ones enabling Paul Biya to do what he's doing. That is hypocrisy. That is hypocrisy. We have seen all the Anglophones in high-profile offices who went out there to campaign for Paul Biya, who said Paul Biya has built schools when Paul Biya has not built any school. Those who went right to Bamenda and said Paul Biya has built roads when he has not built any roads in Bamenda. If anything, they have killed our children. And all these people are responsible for the death of all the Anglophones who died. All of them. Every Anglophone serving in this regime is a traitor. Every single one. And for us to sit with those same people, look at them in their faces, have a cordial conversation with them, to the point of dining with them, then we are not different from them. Then we can consider ourselves enablers as well. I'm saying this because I talked about it on a forum, and I got some calls and some messages from members of those forums asking me why I should say that people should be excommunicated from groups. Really? Really? Why this hypocrisy? Why? And we are saying we want a better Cameroon? Why are we pretending? Why are we pretending? If you can stand and talk against Paul Biya, and you cannot talk against those who are supporting and campaigning for him, knowing exactly what he has done, then even you who called me, or you who sent me that message, just don't want to call names. You are not different from them. You're not different from them. Some told me that we should respect their beliefs. You should respect the belief of someone who believes that other people's children should be killed, that people should be kidnapping people, that those are the beliefs you want us to support. It is not as if there are two parties or people are disagreeing on policies. That is not the case here. It's not as if we are disagreeing on policies. If that was the case, that would even be better. Because when you have two parties like they have in the United States, the two sides don't agree on certain policies. And it's because one thing they can do better for the country. Their competition is to do better for the country. It's not a case where people are killing children. The country has gone 50 years behind. We are living here today because we cannot live there. And somebody says, I should respect their beliefs. Come on, people. Come on. This is why I keep saying we do not love that country enough. We do not love ourselves enough to really want to see change. Because if we did, we will do things differently. We cannot pretend. We cannot pretend that we want to see change and we dine with those people. That is pretense. That is hypocrisy. I don't talk my own.
Cameroon may be approaching the moment when history stops whispering and starts pounding at the door with force. 42 years after the failed 1984 coup swept Isaachuma Bakari into years of imprisonment, despite his denying involvement, he is now openly appealing to the very military that helped save Paul Biya's presidency. But Paul Biya is now 93, succession is unsettled, the vice presidency remains vacant, and uncertainty hangs over Yaounde. Could the institution that helped preserve the Biya era in 1984 ultimately determine how that era ends? Stay with me, because that is where this history becomes explosive. Hello, good evening. You're welcome to the JMA Connections. And today is Friday, the 24th of July, 2026. And we are going to delve into some very interesting discussion today regarding a message delivered by Isaachuma Bakari on the 20th of July to the military of Cameroon. What really is the significance of that message? Is Isaachuma just a noisemaker, or is there something amidst?
En ma qualité de chef de l'État démocratiquement élu et de chef des armées, et à un mois de la célébration de la fête des armées, le 14 août 2026, je vous rends un vibrant hommage, hommes et femmes en tenue, pour la tâche qui vous incombe, notamment de défendre l'intégrité de notre territoire.
Isaachuma Bakari's decision to address the Cameroonian military directly is politically significant, really significant, because it moves his challenge to the Biya government beyond ordinary politics. I'd say beyond ordinary politics and into the sensitive question of where the armed forces place their loyalty when electoral legitimacy is disputed. You know, since Cameroon returned to multi-party politics in 1990, election after election have been marked by protests, and each of them, Paul Biya has done the very same thing. Use the army, repress the people, make some arrests, and a lot of the time kill a number of young people, and the people finally run under their beds. The atmosphere grows calm, and Paul Biya continues to reign. But this time around, the dynamics are different. A presidential candidate has gone on exile, continues to declare himself the winner of the election, and continues to call himself the legitimate president. After a moment of hibernation, when Isaachuma always spoke through proxies, Isaachuma is today, more than ever before, from the same Gambia, being extremely vocal. And he's not just talking, he's saying a lot of very pertinent things and carrying out some concrete actions, like suing President Paul Biya and some of his regime barons in both France and Switzerland. So in July 2026, that is this month, Tchiroma appealed to the defense and security forces to facilitate his return from exile in the Gambia, while continuing to maintain that he won the October 2025 presidential election. There is an African proverb that says, when you find a toad dancing in broad daylight, know pretty well that there is a drummer in a nearby bush. So the question that we ask ourselves at this point, is Tchiroma just a noisemaker? Is he just bickering? Is he just ranting? Does he just want to stay, say, politically relevant, or he just does not want to get out of the news? Evidence on the ground points to the effect that there is massive discontent. Evidence on the ground points to the effect that there is a growing malaise, even within the ranks of the military of La République du Cameroon, that has generally been loyal to and has supported Paul Biya unconditionally, keeping him in government as president right up to this moment. But the significance of Isaachuma Bakari's pointed address directly to the military is threefold. First, he is implicitly arguing that the military should distinguish between loyalty to the state and loyalty to the sitting government. Now, at this point, you ask yourself the question, is that army not aware that this is what it ought to do? Does it need some Isaachuma Bakari to come and remind the army of their role, that they are a Republican army and ought to be loyal not to an individual, but to institutions, but to a state? The second significance is that by asking soldiers to assist his return or refuse to sustain what he regards as an illegitimate political order, Isaachuma Bakari is attempting to penetrate one of the principal pillars upon which the BIA system depends. Why do I call it one of the principal pillars upon which the BIA government depends? The BIA government has been rightly described by some political pundits as a civilian military regime. Strange, right? But there is a Nigerian who once wrote a book, and that book was entitled The Policy of Similicy, that's civilian military regime. And he thought that in Nigeria, because at the time coups were the order of the day, he thought that in Nigeria, if something were done in such a way that there could be power sharing between the military and civilian politicians, something could change. At least the country could revert to some measure of democracy. But of course, there's been a lot of changes in Nigeria since then. But that is not the case with Cameroon. The case with Cameroon is someone who is civilian has taken the army, which ought to serve the interest of the wider community, and transformed it into his personal army. That's what it is. And so election cycle after election cycle, even members of the armed forces grumble. But at the end, when they are asked to go out on the streets to repress people who are fighting for the same reasons they ought to be fighting themselves, they are very eager, trigger happy to go out there and open fire on the civilian population. And so the question that lingers on the minds is Isaachuma Bakari so naive to think that a mere speech by someone who is considered within the Cameroonian circles right now an outsider and a coward who simply could not stand to face the heat, that those statements could really be potent? Let's look at the third significance first before we come back to look at some of these questions I just raised. The third significance is that even without an actual military revolt, the very fact that an opposition leader believes it is worthwhile to appeal directly to soldiers can deepen suspicion within the security establishment and force the regime to question the political reliability of officers and rank and file personnel. You have noticed that the divide and rule that Paul Biya put in place has reached levels where even top officials in the armed forces are now also facing the brunt. Some top military personnel are now either being radiated from the forces, demoted, or simply silenced because they are identified to be supporting one personality or the other, or to be routing for one political obedience or the other, or for believing in the candidacy of one individual or the other regarding the necessary transition that Cameroon must go through. I'm talking here about succession at the helm of the state. So there is also an important historical precedent to what is happening right now. When you look at Isaachuma Bakari, this is a gentleman who was, in a good position in 1984. So, after the failed April 6, 1984 coup attempt against Paul Biya, Tchiroma was arrested on April 16 and subsequently spent more than 6 years in detention in Kondengi. He has had the opportunity to narrate his ordeal, to say how he was tortured, how he was badly battered, how people poured urine in his mouth and all of that. And so I look at what the international media thinks about this kind of outing by Isaachuma Bakari, and I was particularly interested in what Reuters said. Reuters describes the beginning of Isaachuma's political career as follows. They say the imprisonment over his alleged involvement in that failed coup, and says Tchiroma comes across today like someone who is not just worried that he won a presidential election and his victory was taken away from him. He comes across as someone who specifically has some serious cause to settle. So for Tchiroma, as far as some of these news analysts are concerned, sitting on that seat, getting into that Unity Palace as president of the Republic is, at this point in time, literally a do or die. Because it might have seemed elusive at the start of the 2025 campaigns for the presidential election. Isaachuma's beginnings were like, you look at his FSNC party and you say, how many people does he have? How many people support him? Where does he really think he is going? And that initially a good lot of us, including myself, thought that Isaachuma was not even sincere. We thought he was, just coming out as an arrangement with the system. No one really saw him coming. But along the line, because of the rejection of Maurice Kamto's candidature and the determination of the late Anicet Ekane, Jacob Chameni, and others who came together along with quite a lot of people, quite a lot of actors in the civil society, and decided they wanted a people's platform. Tchiroma saw an opportunity and he dived in, and today he believes very sincerely that he has earned the right. He has earned the right, absolutely, to sit as president of the Republic and to do exactly what he had waited just so long to do. Tchiroma himself has constantly denied participating in that 1984 coup and has always said what happened to him was simply, a kind of witch hunt for the mere fact that he hailed from the northern regions of La République du Cameroon, for the mere fact that he was appointed to the position where he was appointed by the late President Amadou Ahidjo, for the mere fact that he was Muslim, and of course that he was Northeast. And so he said this in Douala a couple of times when he went there for campaigns. So the 1984 episode ended disastrously for the coup plotters. Elements of the presidential guard rebelled against Biya, but loyalist forces, including crucial elements of the armed forces, defeated them after several days of fighting. The aftermath included mass arrests, executions, and a state of emergency, and politically a dramatic strengthening of Biya's control over the state. So the failed coup ultimately helped Paul Biya to consolidate power rather than weaken him. And like I said, this happened after Paul Biya and his clansmen repressed almost everyone within the system, within the governing system that hailed from the northern regions. That is why today, a lot of the people, Bulu, Ekam, Beti, believe very strongly that if anyone from the northern regions were to become president of La République du Cameroon, it will spell doom because they fear vengeance. They fear that spirit of revenge. So that history gives Tchiroma's present appeal an extraordinary irony. A man who spent more than 6 years imprisoned after being suspected, rightly or wrongly, of association with the military attempt to overthrow Paul Biya is now, more than 4 decades later, openly appealing to the armed forces in the context of another confrontation with the Biya's regime. But do not forget that Isaachuma ultimately served Paul Biya first as Minister of Transport after he came through the opposition. After he served as Minister of Transport, he went back to the opposition, came away again from the opposition, and this time joined the Biya government as Minister of Communication, where Isaachuma Bakari vouched for Paul Biya and stood day and night and gave the impression that he could even take a bullet for Paul Biya. Today, Isaachuma Bakari is militantly against that system, to the point of calling on the military not to take orders from the Biya system. So there is also a more recent precedent to some of these things. During the tense aftermath of the 2025 presidential election, Isaachuma Bakari said that a faction of the military protecting him while he disputed the that was protecting him. He said a faction of the Cameroon military was protecting him while he disputed the officially announced outcome and the claimed victory. At that time, the Agence France-Presse reported that Isaachuma publicly stated that an army faction was providing him protection during a period of serious post-election unrest. So that suggests that his current appeal to the military does not just emerge, from nowhere and suddenly in July of 2026. Rather, there had already been signs that Isaachuma believed that he possessed or hoped to cultivate sympathy within parts of the armed forces. I spoke to a lot of government officials in Yaounde, and especially to some top military personnel at various levels, at various rungs of the Cameroon military. And what I gather is that there is a real malaise within the military right now, and that malaise is compounded by the fact that despite throwing in their entire support to the Biya system to sustain that system, right now the Minister of Finance is about causing the military serious harm. And some of them spoke with a lot of passion. They said the rank and file in the military are depending on the open sources of corruption that the Biya system deliberately allowed to cause them to feel involved in everything that is happening in the country and to own the system. Reason, there has been really unbridled loyalty all this while. Sure, you have an idea exactly what I'm talking about. The Minister of Finance recently said that a lot of the people in the military have lined up children on their pay slips for family allowances, some of them having as many as 20, 30, 40 children on whom they are receiving monthly family allowances. And those children are, of course, fictitious. And said, caught up in a very challenging financial environment, the Minister of Finance was forced to take action and to make sure that when the culprits are caught, they will be forced to pay back to the state. This is exactly the opportunity that some of these people told me that Isaachuma Bakari is exploiting, and is not only making noise on social media as he's speaking, but apparently has people within who are canvassing within the military to have factions emerge. And so if that happens, sooner than later, we definitely should not be surprised. This is why I say, armed with this background information I've just shared, this makes Isaachuma Bakari's current rhetoric particularly sensitive for the Biya government. A conventional opposition party can be politically contained through elections, the courts, administrative restrictions, or policing. But disaffection within the military is different. Authoritarian or highly personalized governments depend heavily upon cohesion within the cohesive institutions of the state. So I'm talking about the military. If soldiers begin questioning whether their duty is to an individual ruler, a government, or the constitution, or what they perceive as the popular mandate, the foundations of political control become much less predictable. Even for a military as dormant as that of La République du Cameroon, this remains a huge concern. And those top military officials that spoke to me said at this point in time, where no one has certainty as to what is going to happen to Paul Biya, and because there is little or no communication absolutely from the government regarding the state of itself, a lot of questions are already being asked within the ranks of the military. So while everyone thinks that perhaps they're just sleeping, waiting for the Famandongos, waiting for the others to, be making bickerings left and right, questions are being asked. And the fact that Isaachuma Bakari decides to mount the rostrum at this point in time to make that bold call to the military is extremely telling and could also have vexing consequences. But Tchiroma is also taking a substantial risk. We must be honest about that here. The precedent of 1984 demonstrates that an unsuccessful military challenge can produce exactly the opposite of what its proponents intend. That is repression, arrests, executions, and a stronger authoritarian consolidation. And there is no reliable public evidence today demonstrating that the Cameroon military as an institution has already taken steps to abandon the government of Paul Biya or is preparing to act on Isaachuma Bakari's appeal. You don't have that public evidence. You don't see that anywhere like very clearly. But the results of the 2025 presidential election could be a pointer. And in a situation where Biya is no longer absolutely in control, where you have a lot of power centers competing with each other, where you have individuals within the system, really like this far, claiming ownership of some factions of the military. Do not forget, Ferdinand Gongo, at this point in time, believes that the B and the special forces pay allegiance to him. And he's doing everything in their life, working very closely with the Israeli commander of the B. And this is something that is a present and current danger. At the same time, Ferdinand Gongo still believes that he has a serious foothold too on the gendarmerie, where he has Galax Etoga, who is the Secretary of State in charge of the gendarmerie, of course, who is someone that everyone believes was, handpicked by him to hold that position. Why that is happening? There are a lot of top guns in the Cameroon administration today who have access to a lot of money, some of whom are ready to use that money for action. And do not forget the information I revealed before, that some of these military officials tell me that there are a lot of, that there's a lot of information about caches of weapons stockpiled in strategic places in the central region, not even out of the central region, in the central region. And so this scenario transforms Cameroon into a powder magazine. So you don't know from what angle the spark can come. Even if Isaachuma Bakari were to boast of say just 1/100th of that military, they hold the potential to make things happen. So let's look at the deeper political meaning. The strongest interpretation, therefore, is not that Tchiroma has already triggered a coup with that statement. There is no evidence of that. Rather, he is challenging the Biya system at its most vulnerable point, the loyalty of the security apparatus during an uncertain succession period. Mark that, during an uncertain succession period, because that is what really matters. Right now, Paul Biya is not even in the country. Right now, everyone knows Paul Biya is not even in control. Right now, everyone knows the country is heavily divided. Right now, everyone knows that right at the presidency, the fraction is horrible. Right now, everyone knows that even the presidential family is tearing itself apart. Not a good moment at all. And that matters enormously because Cameroon is simultaneously dealing with Paul Biya's prolonged absences and the questions about his health, a vacant vice presidency, unresolved succession maneuvering, and continuing post-election contestation and the armed conflicts in several parts of the country. I'm going to say several parts of the country. I'm not even talking of the southern Cameroon, talking of the Republic du Cameroon. Boko Haram in the northern regions creating a lot of stir, and once in a while you have tensions in the east region where you have a lot of the former Seleka armed men from the Central African Republic waiting to be used. I say waiting to be used at any moment by some politicians who are also looking for avenues to gain power. Do not forget that a lot of the time a link has been drawn between these people, the president of the Central African Republic, Touadera, and Amugu Belinga, who is supposedly the treasurer of a faction that is commandeered by Laurent Messo. These are all things that must be taken into consideration. So that matters enormously, as I said, because at this point in time, anything can happen. So I will summarize the situation like this before I get into some of the core things that Isaachuma Bakari said. That in 1984, Paul Biya survived a military challenge and emerged dramatically stronger. Isaachuma was swept into the repression that followed and spent more than 6 years in prison despite denying involvement. 42 years later, the same Tchiroma is openly addressing Cameroon's soldiers and asking them to reconsider whom they should obey. So the question is no longer simply whether the military will listen. It is whether the Biya system can afford even the suspicion that some soldiers might decide to listen to Isaachuma Bakari, whom in the excerpt you are going to listen is referring to himself as Commander-in-Chief. Listen.
Monsieur le chef d'état-major des armées, mesdames, messieurs les officiers supérieurs, mesdames, messieurs les officiers et sous-officiers, mesdames, messieurs les femmes et hommes en tenue de la gendarmerie nationale, des armées de terre, de l'air, de la marine et du corps de sapeurs-pompiers, en vos grades, rangs et qualités respectifs, mes chers compatriotes, je suis Tchiroma Bakari, président élu de la République du Cameroun à l'issue de l'élection présidentielle du 12 octobre 2025. Monsieur le chef d'état-major des armées.
So you see, Isaachuma Bakari does not mince words. He continues to refer to himself as the legitimate president, as the president-elect. And in this other cut, he refers to himself as the commander-in-chief of the military. Here.
En ma qualité de chef de l'État démocratiquement élu et de chef des armées, et à un mois de la célébration.
So you hear, chef de l'État démocratiquement élu, chef des armées. So what makes Tchiroma's intervention unusually consequential, like I started saying earlier, is that he is not merely asking the military to remain neutral. He is constructing an argument that the armed forces have constitutional and patriotic obligation, to reconsider their relationship with the Biya government and ultimately to facilitate his return to Cameroon. The core of Tchiroma's message, because he says, your oath, this is what he tells the military, your oath is to the people. Your oath is to the people and not to Paul Biya. This is something that you have heard a lot of activists say it here and there and all of that. But this is no longer just coming from social media activists or some disgruntled individuals here and there. It's coming from the lips of a politician who claims that he got 70% of the military vote during a presidential election. So Tchiroma begins strategically. Rather than attacking the military as an institution, he cuts it. He praises soldiers for defending Cameroon's territorial integrity, acknowledges the risks they face, and promises them a more professional, modern, and better supported military under his leadership. His message includes the pledge: under my leadership, I will ensure a more professional, stronger, and a more modern army. So he's not just bickering. He's not just throwing tantrums. He begins by not doing what a lot of others will do. Oh, you this military, you are stupid, you are nonsensical, you are not patriotic, you allow yourselves to be used and all of those things, whereas you're supposed to stand for the people. No, he praises them. Yes. So this is politically important because Tchiroma is speaking as though the election dispute has already been resolved in his favor. He's speaking as though the dispute between he and Paul Biya, who won the election in 2025, has already been resolved in his favor. He calls himself the president-elect, claims the electorate, including members of the defense and security forces, gave him a mandate, and consequently addresses soldiers not simply as an opposition politician seeking their sympathy, but as someone claiming the authority of their incoming commander-in-chief. Would there be some in the military who will be flattered by this message? This is exactly what you can't tell. And that's exactly the risk that the system faces if they choose to ignore Isaachuma Bakari and see this as mere gesticulations. So then comes the central argument. Remember that you have sworn an oath to serve the Cameroonian people, says Isaachuma Bakari. That sentence is arguably the ideological heart of the entire address that Isaachuma Bakari presented. Tchiroma is attempting to separate loyalty to Cameroon from loyalty to the Biya government. He believes that not all will pay attention. He may not even gamble on the fact that up to 50% will pay attention. But does he succeed in getting up to 10% of them pay attention and start thinking coups are usually not generally organized by an entire army? You look at what happened in Burkina Faso. The coup in Burkina Faso was not organized by a general. The president is the captain. So inside Tchiroma's implied proposition is that if the government no longer represents what he calls the sovereign will expressed in the October 2025 presidential election, then obedience to that government cannot automatically be equated with patriotism. So in a very subtle manner, he's telling the Cameroon military, if you continue to support Paul Biya, you are not being patriotic. That's why he says clearly, take your responsibilities. He says, take your responsibilities. This is direct. That's where the message becomes more serious. He says, you must take your responsibilities. You must take your responsibilities. What is their responsibilities? To stand up for the people. What do the people as a majority want? People believe that Biya has overstayed his welcome. So when I looked at, when I went on social media, I looked at what my dear colleague Tamfu of Cameroon News Agency wrote. He similarly reported that Tchiroma urging the Chief of Defense Staff and Security Forces to take their responsibilities and, support what he calls a transition is not just a dangerous move. It's not just, it's not just a kind of gamble. It might be something that ends up with an entirely different reaction from what either Tchiroma or the Biya regime could imagine. So that language matters enormously, as I'm saying. Tchiroma is effectively asking individual soldiers and commanders to exercise political judgment about the legitimacy of the authority giving them orders right now. That is profoundly sensitive in a constitutional system, because professional armed forces ordinarily operate through an established civilian chain of command rather than independently adjudicating electoral legitimacy. This is why I say that Isaachuma retails his political message to the military in such a way that if you people can obey or pay careful attention to what I'm saying as a bloc, factions or some individuals among you should pick this message and run with it. Tchiroma reinforces that point by warning soldiers, do not allow yourself to be drawn into this calamitous path with no future. Did you hear that? He warns the soldiers. He says, I'm quoting him directly, do not allow yourself to be drawn into this calamitous path with no future. So in other words, his message is not simply don't shoot protesters. It is closer to do not allow yourself to become the instrument through which an order I regard as illegitimate perpetuates itself. Do not allow yourself to become the instrument through which an order I regard as illegitimate perpetuates itself. Then comes the most extraordinary request. Come and take me home. That is laughable, right? Or listen to it, you burst into laughter and say, "Oh my goodness, what is he talking?" Tchiroma, a primary school, pupil. That calls for laughter on social media, right? But do not take it at face value. The speech reaches its political climax when Tchiroma stops speaking abstractly about constitutional responsibility and gives the military something approaching a concrete request. I solemnly ask you to come and take me home from the Gambia. That is a sentence Yaounde has the greatest reason to examine carefully, very carefully. Is Tchiroma coyly preparing the minds of Cameroonians to the effect that he is likely to come back in one way or the other? Is he preparing the minds of Cameroonians to the effect that there may be some confrontation? Because these are all possibilities. He is asking the armed forces of a state whose internationally recognized president remains Paul Biya to facilitate the return of a challenger who describes himself as the elected president. He then declares, I am eager to be by the side of my people, the Cameroonian people who elected me. And he goes still further. According to, the excerpts that I got, Tchiroma argues that it should be him as commander-in-chief presiding over the August 14 Armed Forces Day celebrations right ahead, less than a month from today, because he considers himself the legitimate winner of the last presidential election. So that transforms the speech from criticism of Biya into a direct contest over presidential authority. You see, sometimes go read literature on how revolutions begin or on how armed insurgencies form. You will understand that taking this kind of speeches, this kind of addresses and all another somebody does with seriousness, beginning with the country's national anthem for granted, could be very costly. So this is what I'm saying. I'm asking, why could Yaounde, why should this speech by Isaachuma Bakari make Yaounde nervous? The most important analytical point is that Tchiroma does not explicitly tell soldiers to stage a conventional military coup. Describing the address simply as Tchiroma orders a coup, if I did that, right, would therefore overstate what the speech establishes. But it is an underling. What he does is potentially more politically sophisticated. This is what I'm talking about. Because Isaachuma uses political sophistication to attempt to prepare the people's minds towards something really big that is likely underway. Like I say, I've spoken to a lot of people, a lot of top military personnel. No one believes that tomorrow is absolutely certain in Cameroon. So he tells soldiers, Isaachuma, that their oath is to the Cameroonian people. Tell them to take your responsibility. Ask them not to follow what he characterizes as a disastrous course. He asserts that he is the elected president and the only one with the authority to tell them to go one direction or the other. So Tchiroma is asking the military to decide whether obedience to the existing government remains compatible with obedience to the popular sovereignty he claims was expressed at the ballot box to him. And he doesn't forget to remind the military that during that election, he got 70% of the vote cast by military personnel. So to sum it up all, when Tchiroma now tells the military, take your responsibilities and come take me home, Yaounde cannot necessarily hear those words as rhetoric occurring in a vacuum. That is why, to wrap it up all, I should say that the essential message is Tchiroma is attempting to redefine the choice of the military of the République du Cameroon. He does not present it as a Biya versus Tchiroma affair. He presents it as loyalty to a government versus loyalty to what he claims is the sovereign will of the Cameroonian people. Whether soldiers accept that argument is completely unknown. But the fact that he is openly presenting that choice to them while claiming the presidency for himself makes his address politically incendiary and should, to all intents, be considered as such. But is the other side taking it that seriously? Why Isaachuma Bakari is making those declarations? Because he's making declarations after declarations. While supporters of Isaachuma Bakari are online, some of them outrightly saying they are preparing militarily to force their way into Yaounde. While Isaachuma Bakari's legal team is working day and night to make life difficult for, President Biya and his regime barons. Because take note, Isaachuma Bakari is aware of the fact that something could happen tomorrow, and some of these people may want to run out of the country to go seek help here and there. But if there are already warrants, if there are already suits against them all over the place around the world, it makes life messy for them. So this doesn't just look like something that's happening out of the blues. It happens, it comes across like a carefully, woven strategy, which may even be comprehensive in nature. But where all of this is happening, on the other side is infighting. Their sons neutralizing each other. Georges Ibert Baola is in jail right now. Frank Emmanuel Biya is locked in a huge battle with Chantal Biya. Chantal Biya, in her own camp, is, still experiencing a serious cold between herself and Ferdinand Gongo. Ferdinand Gongo and Osval Baboke are, at daggers drawn on each other's throats and all of those. And while all this is happening, to put the icing on the cake, Chantal Biya took the extraordinary step to jump into a pleasure boat to New York. You see that Chantal Biya, you see her there, she was at the MetLife Stadium in New York, United States of America, to watch the final of the FIFA World Cup tournament that featured Argentina versus Spain. It's not even like Cameroon was involved. It's not even like another African country was playing the final that you would say it was very compelling, maybe for Chantal to come out here in solidarity. No, this is simply a pleasure trip. Pleasure trip at the time her husband is agonizing on a hospital bed in Switzerland. At a time the entire country is burning. At a time the 2026 state budget is yet to get into its execution phase. At a time credit cards for the execution of that state budget are yet to be shared out to vote holders. At a time the country's national debt has attained a trillion CFA. 1 trillion. Cameroon's national debt is now at over 1 trillion CFA. This is huge. But while all that is going on, the Maria Therese of Cameroon is having fun and having a lot of fun. One thing I know is that the people of the southern Cameroons are watching very carefully and taking serious notes. And that when the time comes, it will be a moment to remember for years and years to come. The pages of history will retain exactly what happens after that. So I want to thank all of you who found time to be part of this live broadcast with me, which was absolutely impromptu. I didn't announce this. I'm delighted that despite that you found time to be on this broadcast with me. I mean, a good lot of you. If it's the first time you're visiting here on the JMA Connections, please go right ahead and hit on that subscribe button and personalize so that anytime something new drops here, you will be the first to know. Of course, when I know, you will also know. And make sure to share the link to this communication as much as possible. Let's reach as many people as possible. And do not forget to hit to drop that like. It generally goes a long way, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. And as I said, stay on the issues. Stay on the issues. Do not go personal. No personal attacks. If there are any personal attacks, of course, as I always promise, I will delete that comment. So thank you very much, everyone, for your very kind attention. And I'll be back on this platform tomorrow for yet another broadcast on the issues happening around us. Until then, to God be the glory.